The Department of Foreign Affairs in Canberra was not given prior warning before Victoria signed the framework agreement with China on the controversial Belt and Road deal last October. Now, when DFAT had seen an earlier draft sometime before October, they warned the state not to proceed with the agreement. Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton criticised the decision again today.
I think as much as anything, people are worried about the lack of transparency. The fact that he won't provide all of the details and release that publicly to be scrutinised says a lot about the intention of both parties, and I would have thought sunlight is a good thing here, but for whatever reason he decides to conduct all of this business in secret, and I just don't think it's in our national interest.
The Australian's foreign editor Greg Sheridan's written about this issue again today. It's not going away as much as the Premier Daniel Andrews might want it to, and ahead of further documents set to be concluded come June, I think it deserves continued attention. Greg Sheridan joins me now from Melbourne. I tell you what, I said this the other night, Greg, I've seen a lot of troubling things as a political commentator and someone who's worked inside the system. This troubles me the most, and I just can't fathom how a state premier can get away with what amounts to be almost a treaty-like document with another country and not involve the national government or even take the advice of experts like Foreign Affairs.
Well, Peter, I think you're absolutely right. This is a disgraceful action by Daniel Andrews, and he was condemned this week by Anthony Albanese and Richard Marles. Now, you can imagine how much they want to get into a brawl with the Victorian State Labor government. But Anthony Albanese said he will never sign a Belt and Road Initiative agreement if he becomes Prime Minister, and he didn't support the Andrews government deal. It is disgraceful because it contravenes national foreign policy. So the Belt Road Initiative has been extremely problematic all over the world, but the reason Australia doesn't sign up to it in principle is because it is a geostrategic power play by China. Now, what Daniel Andrews has done is say he rejects the foreign policy of Australia and he is going to sign up with the foreign policy of a nation in contradiction of the foreign policy of Australia in a matter of geostrategic importance. Now, Andrews does not have the institutional capability to assess those matters. He hasn't accessed the Commonwealth government departments that do have that ability. And if Andrews now sets himself up as someone who can make foreign policy, then I want him to comment on human rights abuses in China and China's action in Hong Kong. But if you ask him about that, he says, no, I'm just a poor dumb state premier. That's a federal government matter, foreign policy, in which case the Belt Road Initiative also should be a federal government matter.
So let me underscore the point that Greg made there for my viewers. He doesn't have access to intelligence reporting. He doesn't have access to high-level diplomatic material coming out of our embassy in China. He doesn't have access to foreign intelligence from foreign agents, foreign bodies like the Five Eyes that other countries might pass to Australia. He's blind on all of these things. It wasn't a decision that he took to the Victorian electorate when he went to the election recently. He's not been transparent either in the earlier MOU or where the negotiations are up to now. The whole document is shrouded in secrecy. And when he's asked questions in a press conference, he's not challenged much. It's basically bugger off, I'll do what I want. Now, I don't understand how this can proceed. Is there any powers the Commonwealth have to say that this is, unconstitutional, that doesn't meet the external powers test? And what sort of precedent are we going to get here, Greg?
Well, it's a terrible precedent setting up states to go against the national government. And Beijing, of course, wants this. They're very happy. They're getting their reward already. So if they're going to Fiji and Vanuatu and Tuvalu and so on and saying to these folks, let us mire you in debt forever and take over the politics of your country through our debt trap diplomacy, the South Pacific nations might say, oh, gee, Australia doesn't think it's a very good idea. Chinese can say back to them, yeah, no, look, the Victorian government thinks it's a wonderful idea. And similarly, in Beijing's current mood where it casts everything that Australia does as a sin against the Holy Spirit, it can say, but look, even the Victorian government rejects the foolish actions of the federal government. Now, in the end, another element of transparency too, Peter, you're right to highlight that, is there is some rather bizarre staff matters going on with Andrews over this. I mean, his government has paid consultancy money to outfits which are lobbying on behalf of the Belt Road Initiative. So they're lobbying his government on behalf of the Belt Road Initiative, and then his government is paying them consultancy fees, and then that wasn't disclosed either. So this whole deal is highly irregular. But at the end of the day, the deal won't amount to very much because anything substantial would have to be approved by the federal government. And part of the history of Belt Road initiatives is that they've promised typically poor nations the world and delivered them only servitude. Now, I think it's in Beijing's interest to try to fling a couple of goodies Victoria's way if it can, but this is going to be very minor stuff. Maybe a little bit of consultancy work in third countries on BRI projects. Any substantial investment China wants to make in Victorian infrastructure would have to be approved by the Foreign Investment Review Board. So it's
but they're asleep at the wheel, Greg. They are asleep at the wheel. They are absolutely under-resourced and sleep at the wheel. And I know you made that point in your article, and you're absolutely right in form. And you're also right on the point you made too, that any foreign workers coming here would have to pass a visa regime run by Peter Dutton. I have faith in Peter Dutton. I don't have much faith in the Foreign Investment Review Board. I've got to go, but I must ask you, what's your reaction tonight to China passing this Hong Kong security bill?
I think we're in for a lot of trouble with China over Hong Kong and Taiwan, a lot of other stuff. And this is why I think it's triply disgraceful for Daniel Andrews and Tim Pallas to be abusing the Australian government for having the temerity to ask for a coronavirus inquiry. But the Chinese have passed a national security bill which will allow them to apply Chinese draconian oppressiveness to Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government is passing a bill which will make it a crime punishable by 3 years in prison to insult the Chinese flag. What you're seeing is the death of independence and the rule of law in Hong Kong. And Beijing is doing this knowing that the world is distracted by coronavirus. The US Congress is beset by the economic troubles that America is facing, and global reaction may be less strong than it should be. I'm glad that Marise Payne, our foreign minister, in company with the Canadian and the Brit, made a strong statement. Of course, strong statements don't butter much parsnips, but at least we're expressing concern, and the whole world should focus on this. It would be the leading story in the world were it not for the virus, and it bodes very ill for the future of democracy, liberalism, or the rule of law in Hong Kong.